Upon completion of this lesson, you'll be prepared to learn the content that we're going to cover in this module, Module 2, and you'll be able to take on kernel-related objectives that you'll find in the Linux Plus exam. So what will you take away from this module? Well, you'll understand how to interact with the kernel, and this is something that you need to know for the exam, and if you're working with kernel modules, which you may find yourself doing in Linux system administration, it's definitely beneficial to understand how the kernel operates when it talks to other Linux components, and you can use this information to troubleshoot issues related to the kernel. The kernel is a foundational topic to Linux, and working with the kernel is something that you're going to have to do and understand to understand how Linux works. So for the rest of this course, we're going to cover module commands that you need to know. We're going to demonstrate the use of some of the kernel commands, and we'll also see where we can find the kernel files. So upon completion of the lesson, you'll be able to understand common kernel module commands. You'll know when each command would be used, and you'll see some of the common options for each of the commands. So the first command we're going to look at is called lsmod, or list module command. It's used to view all of the modules that are loaded in the kernel, and it doesn't have any additional arguments or flags or options. In other words, you just type lsmod, and then it displays the output of all the modules that are loaded in the kernel. You can certainly pipe that. We saw that a little bit in the previous module. You can pipe things over to other commands and then filter them using a command called grep that we'll look at later. But beyond that, the lsmod command is very simple. You just run it and it gives you a list of all the modules that are running in the kernel. Now, the ins and rmmod commands are used to insert and remove modules respectively. The rmmod command is something that you probably are going to want to use with the V flag or the V option for verbose outputs. You can see exactly what it's doing when it's removing things. And you can use both of these commands with the -H option. That's the help flag. The -H flag is the help flag, and it just displays all the options that you see on the screen on the right-hand side. Basically, all the options that you have when you're running the command are displayed. Now, it is worth noting that insmod and rmmod are deprecated, and nowadays modprobe is used in the place of these two commands to do the same functionality. We'll move on and look at modprobe here later in the lesson, but with that being said, that's what we have for these two commands. Now, the modinfo command is used to display information about a specific module, where before we had lsmod that just prints the output of about every module that the kernel has loaded. We can use modinfo to get more granular and look at the information on a specific module. So we can certainly put in modinfo and then provide it options and then give it the name of the module that we're looking to find information about. And some of those options we see on the right-hand side. So things like description or license. Maybe we want to see what file is actually associated with that module name by using the -N option or -N flag. And those are basically the options that you'll see. And keep in mind, as I said previously, as you go through these commands, most of the time you can use the -H option to get a help output and see all of the options that are available. Now, the modprobe command, as I said, replaces insmod and rmmod. It's a wrapper for those two commands. And the nice part about modprobe is that it's dependency aware, which means that if you're trying to install a module or remove a module with modprobe, it will add or remove the supporting modules, the modules that are needed to load or remove that module that you're trying to work with using the modprobe command. And again, you can see on the right-hand side a lot of the different options that are available with this command. And then we also have the depmod command. This is used to find and handle kernel dependencies. The most common option that you'll ever use with the depmod command is depmod -A. The -A option will probe and find all of the modules. And that's actually done by the system upon boot. And the reason for this is that the kernel needs a list of all the modules and all the dependencies that it needs to load upon boot time. So it runs depmod -A to get that list and then load all the modules and all the dependencies that it needs. Finally, we'll look at the dmessage command. The dmessage command is used to read the kernel ring buffer. Well, that's kind of weird. What is a ring buffer? Well, ring buffer is just a space, a file that has a certain limited amount of space. And when it gets to the end of that, it starts overwriting the beginning. So it kind of circles around back to the beginning and starts overwriting that same space. So it's called a ring buffer. But really, for our purposes, The reason we want to talk about dmessage is that it has kernel logs, and it will display the kernel logs that come up when you add or remove modules to the kernel. So upon completion of the lesson, you'll be able to use common kernel module commands. You're going to find the files that we need to know about for kernel management. You're going to understand where to find those files in CentOS and Ubuntu. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get right to it with some demo time. So let's go ahead and switch over to our CentOS system and get started. Okay, so here we are in our CentOS system, and one of the things that we always want to look at here is our output of the lsmod to see all of our modules. And let me go ahead and just hit enter on this, and you'll see that a bunch of stuff just flew by, because this is really all that lsmod does. It just displays all of the loaded modules. Now, you can do something like pipe this output to a less pager. We talked about this previously. The less pager just allows us to send output from one command to another command, and we can use the less pager to page through the output. The pipe allows you to pipe information from one command to another. So we'll go ahead and hit enter on this, and now we can page up and page down using the page up and page down keys on our keyboard to move through the output of the lsmod, so it doesn't just all get kind of blasted out to our screen. And we can kind of see all the modules that we have loaded in the kernel at this point. Now, another thing that we can look at right here is using the modprobe command. Now, we're going to need to elevate the privileges of the user account that we're using here in order to use modprobe. So we're going to use sudo to do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to load a dummy module. In fact, I'm just going to call the module dummy. And we're going to do sudo modprobe dummy. I'm going to get prompted for my password to elevate privileges on my user account. And I'm going to pipe that in there. And now we can see that the command ran successfully by doing a lsmod and doing a pipe to the grep command. And the grep command just will look for the string that you provided. So we're going to provide it the string dummy to search inside of lsmod, and we can see that dummy is indeed installed now. Modprobe dummy installs the dummy module. Well, we don't really want a module called dummy on our system. That's kind of silly. So what would we do to get rid of that? Well, we can also use modprobe to remove this. Remember that modprobe replaces insmod and rmmod. So the modprobe-r command, or the r option, is used to remove a module. And so what we'll do is we'll just hit enter here. And now if we do an lsmod again and we grep for dummy, we get nothing back because the module has been removed. And that's really all that you need to know about the modprobe command for the purposes of this lesson. Let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to look at the user lib modules directory. This is another directory that you need to know about for the Linux Plus exam. And so what we can do is we can navigate to user lib modules. And what we'll see in this directory if we do an ls is all of these kernel versions, right? And so what happens is each kernel version has to know about all of the modules that is responsible for. So if we do a uname-r, we can see that our current module is 4.18.240.10.1 EL8, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go ahead and copy this, or actually, better yet, we'll just use some of the shell expansion that we used previously. And what we'll do is we'll change directory into the directory that has the name of the current kernel. Okay, and now we can see that we are in this directory 4.18.0.240.10, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if we do an ls in this directory, we can see all of these modules. And what this is, or what these are, is all of the modules that depmod has to read from to understand the module dependencies the kernel has to know about. Now, another file that they may ask you to know about on the Linux Plus exam is the etsy modprobe.conf file, but I'm going to tell you the file doesn't exist anymore. If we do an etsy modprobe, we're going to see that there is no modprobe, there is no modprobe.conf directory, and the only file that we'll actually find on here in this directory, we do cd etsy mod and then hit tab, we'll see modules load and modprobe D. And we'll talk about modprobe D in just a minute. But let's go ahead and move over to Ubuntu here and see if we see the modprobe there as well. All right, so we're over here in Ubuntu, and let's go ahead and try and navigate to etc modprobe, and just go ahead and hit tab, and we see there's modprobe.d. Let's see, is there a modprobe.conf? No, there is no modprobe.conf directory in a modern CentOS or Debian-based distribution like Ubuntu. It's deprecated. But what we can do is we can look at etc modprobe.d. And inside of this directory, we're going to see a bunch of .conf files. Now, these .conf files have taken the place of etc modprobe.conf and are used in order to configure the modprobe system. So the other thing we can look at in Ubuntu here is we can go back to user lib modules and do an ls. And just as we saw before, we have all of the different kernels that have been installed on this system. And we can cd into the most recent kernel using some shell expansion tricks. And then we see that we're in the most recent kernel that the system is running. And we can do an ls, and we're going to see all the modules in here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move back over to our slides. So in this lesson, we covered common kernel module commands, where to find some of the kernel files, and where these files can be found in CentOS and Ubuntu. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.